So welcome to another war game review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and today we're taking a look at a solitaire game, hence I'm here on my own, and that is Lawrence of Arabia, the Arab Revolt, 1917-1918. This is solitaire from Decision Games. And this is one of their mini games from their Raiders series. There's a number of these little folio games. I actually have a couple others. Well, I got one other. I got Heroes of Telemark, which I'll probably play. I haven't touched that one yet. I'll play and do a review on that one separately. Grant's played a couple of these. I think he's got Merrill's Marauders and at least one other one. That Merrill's Marauders is in this Raiders series. So these are small. I think this was like $15. Picked it up at WBC. Small little solitaire games played on a small map. I mean, like 2 lines of counters. Bring your own dice. They do not provide dice in it, but you only need 1 in these games. In the older ones, like the LRDG, you'd roll kind of a bunch of dice, but the new system, you just kind of roll 1, and it's combat values in this. I've got a couple extra markers, but those are just for me. So I've got a bunch of war game markers that I use just to help me focus on the different missions, because in the game comes with 4 different missions, and you can play them as a campaign. Very difficult, by the way. And they all have quite different victory conditions for each of the missions. Sometimes you've got to occupy a number of port spaces. Sometimes you've got to blow up a number of rail spaces. Sometimes you've got to get to Damascus or Medina and have done some other bits and pieces. So just giving yourself the visual on the map of where your victory conditions are. I've got this little extra kind of cube markers just to help me out, but that's not included in the game. The game is literally like little folio, 1 sheet of game-specific rules, a double page of series rules, like 2 lines of counters, and a deck of, I think you get 14 of the ops cards and 4 of the mission cards. That's all you get in the game. It's very small, very light packages, very transportable, very portable. And it's one of those things that I look at on the rack every so often, and I've just never pulled the trigger. And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to do it. Why not? I was picking something else up from them, so I thought, yeah, I'll just do it. We'll see what they're like. Is this something small and engaging and worth it? So in the game, it's a point-to-point movement map. It's a small map. They've got lots of different types of terrain on it, big terrain key on it. And, this one is your Lawrence of Arabia. And if you think about the film, right, or, the actual history that happened, it's you're trying to recruit guys to your side and take over the ports, just sabotage the railway line, and then kind of build a force together and go and charge on Damascus. You're trying to do all of that in these different missions. Normally in this series you have what I believe are called recruit points that you accrue and you spend to get guys. In this one it's pounds, because it's a currency. You're kind of buying people's loyalty. You can spend them to try to recruit leaders by kind of bribing them. But other than that, they function very much the same way. There's different gear that you can get to enhance your units that you get. And the units have some nice little quirks about them. So you've got like the Arab mercenaries who can go through the open desert spaces. Normally it's only leaders that could do that. But you've got the Arab Bedouins on camels. They're cheap and there's lots of them. Some of them are very good, but you pick them at random, so you don't quite know what you're recruiting. And then there are cards that they kind of they go away. They kind of go back home, or something takes them away, and you can lose them randomly, which kind of sucks. They're not necessarily the most reliable. But generally speaking, and part of it is that I was new and not very good. Very, very punishing game. This was very challenging. Just the first mission, genuinely, I probably set it up and tried to play it probably 15 to 20 times. And that's not an exaggeration in any way. Because it was so... There were some times you'd get very unlucky, and you would just kind of you'd run into a brick wall in the first combat, and with some terrible rolls, you'd be finished and kaput. There'd be other times where it was very much a strategic blunder, or a tactical blunder on my part, where it was like, oh, I could have done this, and I thought, oh, I'll take a gamble. Not a good plan. So some of it's your own fault, some of it's the game's fault, which is that's a good mix. And then once I kind of figured out, oh, I could try doing these different things, try to utilize some of the terrain, or spend my time doing other things, going around and attacking these things. And lots of weak guys is sometimes better than one or two strong guys, so that you have expendable troops. Because if Lawrence dies, you're done. You lose. And if you've only got Lawrence and a really strong guy, because that's all you could afford, because that's what you spent your RPs on, it's very easy. If you lose a tactical advantage, which is effectively battle initiative, and they roll before you and they roll well, it'll just collapse immediately, and you'll lose. You just got to set it up again. Luckily, setup is very quick. But just know that I felt like this game offered a lot of challenge, which was, frankly, for a small little game, $15, that's what I wanted. So I was very happy with that aspect of it. I really enjoy Lawrence of Arabia, one of my favorite films of all time, let alone war films. And it's one of those things where I've got the big one over here, Pursuit of Glory, just acquired that reasonably recently. So at some point we'll get to that. But you're going to slap on the original soundtrack, and you're going to set it up, and you're going to play it, and it's just, it's fun. I had a great time doing it. There were times you'd be crushed, and it was a little frustrating, and there were times where you'd be doing really well, and you'd be very close to the end, and then you'd get crushed, and it was like, ugh. And then when I finally completed the first mission after 20 tries of asking, it was like, ah, yes, I did it. And then the second mission, I failed it the first time, which is fine. It's not great, but it's fine. If you fail it the second time, you just lose the campaign. If you fail a mission twice in a row. But I passed it the second time of asking, and then the third mission was just, no, it was not great. I did not do very well. But that's what you want in a solitaire game. You want some challenge. You want it to be enjoyable and not super overwhelming, right? It's a very small map. You're playing on that. Almost all the charts and tables are printed on the map. There's one chart in the game-specific rules that you might use in some of the missions sometimes, where you have to appeal to High Command in Cairo, but that takes a lot of time to go down there and do that. And is it really worth it? So, lots of neatness to it. This deck of cards, and this could be a me thing, the deck of ops cards, you're going to kind of recruit some guys, move your forces, and then you have to pick a card, and you just draw from the top of the deck, and sometimes it'll have like a bunch of Ottomans show up, and you have to fight them, and you do a combat. Sometimes it's like, oh, keep this card for later, and you can do a leadership check to try and get something. Or sometimes it's some other kind of boon, but a lot of it's not great. Those also act as a timer, so you'll have like the mission setup will say, oh, you have 10 of those cards. If you haven't completed your objectives by the last card in that deck, you lose. And there are some combats where you can add more cards in, because you won't use all of them. There are some where if you lose a combat, you'll lose cards, and so it can affect how long you've got left by not doing your objectives and combats very well, which I thought was really cool. But what I was going to say is these have already seen a lot of wear and tear from me reshuffling and resetting up, so I do have mini card sleeves on order, and I will definitely use those, because these have already seen something of a beating, because I'm not very good at this game, and I've had to reshuffle and set this up a lot of times. And I wanted to do the same thing, for Heroes of Telemark, so that, I don't know, just to kind of preserve it a little bit better, because it's just one of those games, you just use the cards a lot, you handle them a lot. If you lose a lot, it's kind of reshuffling and reshuffling, and they get some wear and tear on them, as any card game would do. But that's kind of a little extra bit. So what I will do is I'll kind of show you how it works, and wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the map, and as you can see, this is kind of the initial setup for the first mission in this, and there's these little mission cards, The last thing that we're going to do, we followed all of this where we set up all of these Ottoman garrisons on this point-to-point map. We set our pounds, which is things we can spend for recruiting. We have a leadership track, that's Lawrence's kind of capabilities. A number of different charts and tables, and the setup and the objectives in these are very different, the things that you're trying to do. So the last thing, and the only thing that we haven't done that we need to do, is we need to check for Faisal's camp. And you roll a little die, we roll the 1, you consult the little chart up here, goes in Yenbo, which is very convenient. Let's see, Lawrence in Cairo at the end of mission. Oh, he's in Yenbo. Okay, cool. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing that. That's nice because we can buy gear from the camp, which we couldn't normally have access to. So, on your turn, I don't think there's a sequence of play listed on here, but on your turn, basically, you're going to recruit guys, you're going to then move them, then you're going to resolve an op card, and then the op card usually leads to combat, and then once you've completed that, you can use any demolition charges you might have or some other actions in other games. So this one is mostly demo charging and things like that too, which is some of the objectives and some of the later missions. So in this instance, we've got 7 recruit points to spend, and what we have to do in this game, and I've got these extra little markers that I have, we have to occupy Akaba, Weiji, or Yenbo, and Suez. So I think we need, what does it say? Akaba, Weiji, plus 1 other Arabian port. So we need to occupy this one, plus this one, or this one. And then we also need to have Lawrence end in Cairo. So he's going to do a bunch of stuff, and he's got to get home, so we have to set up troops in these spaces. So we're already here, so we should try to do that. So what we're going to do, and I have these little green markers just as to help me to remember these are the ones you're going for, and I've got these red tiddlywinks in Medina and in Damascus, because just as a reminder, there's nothing on the map for that. If you win a combat in either one of these, you get an extra op, which is an extra card in the deck, which gives you more time. Or if you lose one there, you lose an op. You lose the time from your card. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is our little 10-card deck, so there's always a few spares for winning and losing ops. I'll keep those off to the side. So we are going to occupy these spaces, and we have to occupy this with Arab Revolt units. Now, the camp is an Arab Revolt unit, technically, it's got it on the back. However, there are ops that will move it, so we don't have a lot of control over that, so we're going to try to recruit something that's going to kind of have some staying power. So the cheapest thing we can buy is some Arab regulars. They've got a 4 combat strength and they've got 1 movement point. We're not going to move them anywhere. So we're going to spend 2 points on that to recruit those guys there. And then we are going to spend 1, 2, 3, 4 on these Arab mercenaries. And we like the Arab mercenaries because they enable us to move through these open deserts. All these other units can't move through open desert. So he's very expensive, he costs 4, but that's a huge boon. And we can also, because we're in a camp, do we have to end our op with him? I don't want to do that. No, we've got the time. So because we end our op in the camp here, we can buy a gear for 1 point. So we've got a little machine gun that turns his combat value from a 3 to a 4. He's going to go in this Lawrence's Army's holding box. And then we are going to flip a card. So when we flip a card, we just read what it says. So there's an Ottoman offensive. See, the first card. Move Faisal's camp if on the map. Well, he's on the map, so this is why we can't count on that camp to hold the space. So we're going to roll a die, and he goes 2, 1, and 2 in Yenbo. So he actually does stay there, but it's very risky. He could have gone somewhere else. Then we're going to roll 1 die. And we rolled a 3, so we consult the 3 in Akaba, If there is no Ottoman garrison there, you would place one. If there is an Ottoman garrison, kind of nothing happens. So this is kind of a counter-attack. If you've cleared off some of these garrisons, they can come back with that card. So it was actually kind of fortuitous that that's the case. There's nothing else for us to do in this space, but we do occupy it, so I'm just going to keep this as a reminder. And then we kind of proceed to the next turn in the sequence of play. There's no turn track or anything like that. We've spent all of these. We can't recruit anything else. We're going to leave that guy behind, which is painful because he's very good. And we're going to swing down. See, what should we do? Should we just attack Akaba? That's probably a mistake. But we'll... no. Oh, is there supposed to be a unit in Wedgie? There's not a guy in Damascus. There's supposed to be a guy here. Okay, good. I knew it was too easy. So, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? We are going to go... Well, we'll just march down here. We're just going to do it the easy way here. We're just going to march down this way into Wedgie, and then we're going to pull a card. And remember, we have this holding box. All of the stuff in here is stacked with Lars, just to help minimize all the units on the board, basically. So we have an Ottoman column. That's very bad. Roll one die, we're going to pick that number of Ottoman units from the bin, and then we're going to place them in the operating forces space, and then we're going to go to the combat procedure. So we rolled 2, so we're going to pick 2 of these, and we shuffle these up, and we pick randomly. So we've got a 4 strength regular unit, and a 3 elite unit of the Pasha, and then on top of that, the garrison flips over, and that's a 2 value. That's going to add 2 more to the combat. So this is probably going to end very poorly and we're all going to die here, but this is just an example. So we've got a 2 combat unit and then a 1 plane. And we kind of line those up in order, and we can put ours in any order that we wish. But we'll just line them up here. And you just kind of fire alternating one to the other. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to determine who has the tactical initiative. So we're going to roll 1 die for them, and they rolled a 5. And for every plus, you add 1. So the Pasha's elite, he's +1. The planes are a scouting unit, they're +1. So this is a 7. And we're going to roll a die. And I rolled a 5, +1 for Lawrence. He's got the little plus in between, that's a 6. So we lose the tactical initiative. And so they're going to start. We're going to alternate. They're going to shoot their strongest unit, and we're going to shoot any one of our units, but we've lined them up so that we'll go from strongest to weakest. So they're going to shoot their strongest unit, and they always target your strongest unit. And you have to roll their firepower, which is a 4 or less. So they succeed, and our guy is immediately killed. This is a very short game if you roll like me. Then it goes to us. Well, we only have Lawrence left. He's going to do a 1. We'll target the Pasha. No. And then the Pasha goes, and he rolls a 5. He misses. Then they're going to roll the rest of their units. Got a 2. No. And a 1 with the plane. No. Then you go back to the top. If every single person had missed and no one took any casualties, in other titles, or if it was not a garrison, you could break off the combat. But because when you're attacking a garrison, there's no break off. So they're going to roll a 4. Cool. And I rolled a 3, so we're dead. And the game's over. So don't do what I did. That's not good. Sometimes you get overwhelmed with numbers, nothing you can do about it, just kind of set up and start again. That's why you might, instead of buying this very expensive mercenary unit that gives you the freedom of the desert, which I didn't use very well, you might buy a couple of these Bedouin Arabs. They're random, and sometimes you get like a 2, sometimes you get a 1, there's a couple of 3s in there. Those are nice, they're cheap, those cost 2 points each, so I could have had 2 of those for the 1 mercenary unit. However, there is a number of cards in here that just kind of, you roll a die on a 5 or a 6, one of them goes away kind of a thing. So they're not as stable. But, this game is not a complicated game. There's not a ton of pieces, but it's going around trying to take ports in this mission and then leave a garrison of your own units in each one of those, and then back off to Cairo. Then the next one you have to kind of go, you have to occupy Medina and then blow up a couple of these rail lines, which you have these demo markers, and you roll a die, and you're trying to destroy them, and they're destroyed for the rest of the game. There's different armored cars, there's planes, machine guns. You can get all sorts of bits and pieces, and sometimes it's the cards give you those. Sometimes you can go back to Cairo and you can kind of request High Command, British High Command, give you things. You can roll your leadership to do leadership checks to recruit Arab leaders. You have to roll your leadership or under, and at the start of the campaign, you are at 1. Some op cards make it go up 1. If you do certain tasks, you might go up another 1. If you succeed at a mission, you go up 1 as well. And so it gets easier to recruit those later as you've kind of proven yourself in the field of battle. But some of these Arab leaders are extremely good. He's a 4/4, so he can keep up with Lawrence of Arabia, but he's also very good in combat. And they, the Arab leaders also have the freedom of the desert as well, so you can do some really cool striking maneuvers and things. But as you saw, you know what? Sometimes you have a bad pull, sometimes you have some bad dice rolls, and it's very punishing. But that's the game. It is not complicated, but I've enjoyed. I played it a lot. The same missions over and over again. I've played the subsequent ones as well, and they're different enough where you're trying to attack different parts of the board and take different things. Like in the first mission, you don't use any demo charges. There's no need for them. In the second mission, that's all you're doing. Is you're trying to get a raiding party and kind of raid up and destroy a bunch of these and occupy Medina. And the order in which you do that's up to you. But you have to do a certain amount of things by the end of the game. You only have this many cards to do it, which seems like that might be a lot. But there are cards, or if you lose certain battles, where you will have to lose ops, and then it's a real-time crunch, and you start getting into really puzzly of like you have to optimize your movements. Very interesting. So that's how this core game works. What I'll do is I'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the game, horrendously, obviously, but very simple in its combat resolution, in the things that you're doing. The complexity, it comes from like the tactical decision making and choices, because I felt like this was, although the map is small and kind of tight in places, I felt like there was a good amount of opportunity to conduct your operations how you wanted to, and to try very different strategies. Especially in that first mission, which I played an unconscionable amount of times. There was any number of ways that you could attempt to do it, and some of those were maybe slightly less efficient, but afforded you an opportunity if you pulled the Allenby card to maybe take a diversion down to Cairo and use that, or do I build a big stack of weak forces and just go charging in, but you've got to have enough RPs or pounds to be able to buy more static forces or leave guys behind who aren't just going to kind of disappear into the ether like the Bedouins will want to do at times. Really, really neat little game. I've not played one of these before. I had a good time with it. The theme really helped with that, is what I would say. Like I said, love Lawrence of Arabia, put the soundtrack on, and you just kind of get into it. Sometimes the game is extremely fickle and you immediately die and you immediately lose. If you can get some of the leaders, which don't necessarily cost you RP, if you can roll well on leadership, and you can get a bunch of guys, you can get some good forces going and kind of get the steamroller going. But then you're a couple bad rolls in combat away from just getting wiped. Everything's kind of on a knife edge all the time in this game, which is nice. There's a lot of jeopardy in the game, and at times very, very challenging. So that's something that I enjoy in a solitaire game. But understand, this is still a very small game. It's not meant to provide you the same extremely rich and deep experiences that you might get in something like RAF Battle of Britain from Decision Games, or their kind of D-Day series, where it's lots of things, very intense and tells a bit more of a detailed story. This isn't supposed to be that, and it isn't, but it's still enjoyable and portable. This is the kind of thing that you take with yourself on a business trip so that you can play in your hotel room alone. That's what it's for. A game of this doesn't take very long. I mean, if you lose, it can take like 2 minutes. But if you're doing it well, you're talking like maybe 20 to 30 minutes if it's a longer mission and you kind of go through all of that. but it doesn't overstay its welcome as far as I'm concerned. And it was an enjoyable little World War One Lawrence of Arabia game. Again, understanding that that's what it is. I've spent $15 on much more frivolous and silly game. Like $15, I'm very happy with that. It does exactly what I wanted to do, and because we got it at a con, I didn't have to pay the shipping, so it was like, yeah, it was $15. That was this. It was great. So, Lawrence of Arabia, the Arab Revolt, 1917-1918, from Decision Games. Check it out if it's something you're interested in. Some of the rules were. There's a lot of complaints on BGG about the rules being somewhat vague in this, and those are not unfounded, but I don't think I had quite so strong as a reaction to that. And it's a solo game, and you just kind of make a decision one way or the other on some of those things. But generally speaking, I found it to be pretty understandable and very playable. So check that out if you're interested, and appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.